So The Witcher show is real good. It's not the best show I've ever seen, frankly, and it also didn't live up to my unreasonable expectations, but it's still very good and worth your time. I don't think I would have understood any of it if I hadn't read the books, but I did, so I don't know. Dandelion, or apologies, Jaskier, is annoying as shit, just as he was in the books, and completely useless, just as he was in the books, so 10 out of 10 on the adaptation there. I do, however, have one just petty little gripe that wouldn't even be the slightest bit grating if we didn't live in the political climate that we live in. Take a look at this crowd. This is a group of random villagers living in a town in the Northern Kingdoms. Is there anything about them that you find is maybe unusual and potentially unexpected to find in this particular, village crowd of random people that live in the same town? Well, yes, they are indeed quite ethnically diverse, which is weird considering the world of The Witcher is supposed to be a medieval fantasy analog. Now, as everybody knows, if you are creating a secondary world that is comparable to some time and place that has existed in the real world, so if you don't go off the walls crazy with your world building, all things that aren't explicitly fantastical elements in that world, ways in which that world is different to the real world, are as they would have been in the real world. This is an essential part of making things be consistent, making them make sense. It's a very key element of world building because it allows people to not get violently janked out of their suspension of disbelief, unless of course that is what you are attempting to do. So in Witcher, there's monsters. This is a thing that's explained. The ramifications of it are noticeable. There's literally like a caste of people who kill monsters for a living. In medieval feudalist Poland, which is the real-world analog to the Witcher world, there was not monsters, and the element of there being monsters is very well integrated into the world building as a fantastical element. In Witcher, there's elves, which also there wasn't in medieval feudalist Poland, and they too are well incorporated into the setting. I hope you're seeing a pattern here. Now, as a significant deviation from the source material, the elves in the show are in fact mostly black, which is, I have to say, really fucking clever and a change that I very much like. I don't think there should have been any white elves. There were white elves, that was kind of grating to me, but whatever. A crowd of such ethnically diverse villages in just a random sort of town, even if it is a port town, wasn't like this in medieval Poland. It's a fantastical element. It's not even like this today in our much more globalized world. Go to a Polish village on the coast if you want to. You're not gonna find a crowd like that. The thing is, this fantastical element is not explained in any way, shape, or form. People don't just get born diverse. That's not how ethnicity works. It's unrealistic and it makes the world less believable. Much like when you have, a medical show or just any show where there's a medical situation described that clearly does not work that way. Imagine if Geralt had been, running around the ice wastes of the Northern Kingdom, maybe somewhere in Kovir or Povis, and then suddenly, just randomly, a Bengal tiger appears. Which, fun fact about Bengal tigers, there's actually more Bengal tigers in private captivity in Texas than there are in the wild all over the world. There's no explanation as to how this animal, which is not native to the regional analog to whatever this area is, which would probably be like Scandinavia or some other place in the polar circle, ended up being in this place where it cannot even survive because it doesn't have the ecological accommodations that it requires for it to, stay nourished and rear up young and all that kind of nice stuff. It's a fantastical element that you should be able to explain, but you're not able to explain. Unless, of course, you do explain it. You don't even need to, explicitly explain that thing. You don't need to hand out idiot-sized pieces of exposition in order to make the world make sense to people. Some things just kind of, you can assume that they will piece them together from the surrounding lore, as in environmental storytelling. So how could you get a crowd this diverse in just some random village? How could this happen in the Witcher world? Let's try to explain this. Let's assume this is actually a piece of environmental storytelling. Well, portals and teleportation are a thing in the Witcher world. That wasn't a thing in the real world, and the vast differences between different populations is kind of the thing that led to there being different ethnicities in the first place. So maybe they were using mass migration to travel with portals, right? Except, you know, portals are actually something that's very exclusive. Not even all wizards use them. Most wizards don't even use them most of the time. They're very expensive to maintain in, like, your essence, your magical energy. We see Yennefer make a couple portals and she almost dies from the exertion. Plus, if portals had been used for something as gargantuan as mass migration, for instance, the economy of the Witcher world would look very different, as would the strategic considerations, because landforms in the geography of the countryside is no longer really relevant for the transport of goods or military campaigns, which would make the whole plot of the world not make sense. What about the conjunction of the spheres, right? I mean, there was this event, which also is how monsters came into the world, where just people came from a different world and humans came over there that way. Maybe the humans that did come over in the conjunction of the spheres came from a much more globalized world that had a lot of different ethnicities living together. Good point. However, the conjunction of the spheres happened 1,500 years ago. Now, it is possible that there might be some ethnic differences that are maintained in, you know, large areas over such time periods. However, when people live together in small areas, as in like the same country or the same hamlet, same village, they tend to intermingle. So over this time period, they would have become pretty homogenous in the way that they look. Unless, you know, somehow they had a reason to, and were also able to enforce miscegenation being illegal for 15 centuries. Which is kind of fucked up. Also, in the dragon episode, Dandelion accurately identifies where the two bodyguards come from based on what they look like. So what you look like and your ethnicity definitely seems to be a factor and not just something that's the same everywhere. That does in fact preclude us from making the argument that all of the people in the Witcher world should look the same because of genetic bottlenecking. This is also what happened when humanity first left Africa. It wasn't like a complete cross-section of the continent in terms of population that migrated to Greater Eurasia over the Sinai Peninsula. It was just the people living in that specific region. Much like it wasn't an even mix of people from Africa and Eurasia who walked over to the Americas when there was still a land connection there. This is why Africa has a greater genetic diversity than all other places in the world combined, and why all pre-Columbian Native Americans can trace their ancestry back to like 8 families. And if you think that that makes any of these groups somehow better or worse than any other group of people, you're racist and you should stop. Also, this isn't always super necessarily relevant to ethnicity as such, because genotype and phenotype are two ultimately different things, but it's a good example to explain how bottlenecking works and how that didn't happen here. We could go to the bottom of the barrel and just say, oh, they used a genre trope that just the genre has, so it doesn't need explanation, like they're just being FTL travel in sci-fi. But they're not really though, are they? Having different species, like elves and dwarves, in the same fantasy village is a trope in fantasy. Different ethnicities, not so much. And yes, there are indeed several named characters that look like they might not be from the Northern Kingdoms. Like that dude from the Cintran court. And precisely because that guy is a named character, you can just point to the anthropic principle and go, there is an explanation for the fate of this individual character, it's just not explicitly highlighted. Wizards are generally a cosmopolitan group. They can literally make themselves look the way that they want. So their ethnicity isn't really relevant either. But why even get bothered about any of this? I mean, the stupid battle strategies that they employ in the show, much more of a sticking point, much more grating. This is true. However, there's a lot of people already analyzing those, and I'm doing something different. And also, there's just another shot that kind of bothers me in this show. Look at this. look at this massive army of a whole lot of people. You notice something that only stands out in the context of the other crowd I showed you earlier. Somehow, for some reason, all of the soldiers fighting for the evil empire are white, even though realistically Nilfgaard has a much greater diversity than one random town in Redania, and it would make sense for their army to be a lot more diverse. And once again, Fringilla Vigo does not count, because not only is she a named character, she is also a wizard and someone living in a region that she is not native to. And I have to ask myself, why? This is clearly a deliberate creative decision. These people are not amateurs. They do things for reasons. Here's genuinely the most favorable explanation that I could come up with. They wanted the normal part of the world where the story is set to look the way, in terms of the people that live there, that also a lot of the modern Western world looks like, which is quite diverse in the big cities, where a big chunk of their audience lives, because maybe they don't want to confuse their audience. I mean, that also kind of implies that they think that their audience is too stupid and maybe uncultured to know that that's not like something that has been happening for very long. And also they really wanted to just keep the aesthetic of the Nilfgaardian black and white, because those are, after all, their arc colors. I have thought long and hard about this, and this is genuinely the best possible reason that I could come up with. Because if this is about representation, I'm sorry to say, but that's a pretty dumb way to go about it. I have always been a huge advocate of diversity in media. One of my oldest videos is literally about that. It gives people with marginalized backgrounds the opportunity to tell their stories to a wider audience, because there's always lives of people who have lived differently to you beyond the horizon, and it's very interesting to learn their perspective. There's a reason why The Wire is basically the best show ever made. It's fascinating, and it promotes empathy and understanding. This is not that. This doesn't tell the story of a marginalized community. This doesn't expand anyone's horizons. This is at best confusing and at worst condemning, because this diverse crowd of people is kind of a dick. So essentially, you're just kind of putting brown people on screen to earn literal brownie points, which is kind of exploitative. Or maybe we'll just get an explanation for this in future seasons that absolutely makes sense. Who knows? Stranger things have happened, but it's not gonna happen. And ultimately, let's be honest, it's not that big a deal. And before you ask, oh, if it's not that big a deal, why'd you make a video about it? I'll tell you, it's because I'm a prostitute. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, maybe buying some of my merchandise, or maybe not. I mean, I am revamping the merch store soon, but if you do want like specific articles that maybe just Spreadshirt has, you know, do it. And in that spirit, you know, Happy New Year 2020 for the first, I think, proper video this year. I mean, I've already put out two. One was an angry rant, the other was the review of last year. I think this is the first proper piece of content on the channel this year, so yes, and see you around, cunts.